Today we're in East Anglia, on the banks of the River Ouse and in the ancient port of King's Lynn, once ranked as the third port of England. The 17th century custom house on the quayside is but one of the many historic buildings which give King's Lynn its special character. In his play Private Lives, Noel Coward told Gertrude Lawrence that Norfolk was very flat, the dull monotone of his voice suggesting that it wasn't only flat, but boring to boot. Well, all I can say is that Noel and Gertie obviously never came to King's Lynn. Historically, it's interesting, and architecturally, absolutely stunning. Many of the town's ancient buildings survive in remarkably good order. The Guildhall of the Holy Trinity, with its striking flint-checkered design dating from 1421, is certainly one of the best preserved 15th century buildings in Britain. Inside, there's the charter of Henry VIII, giving the town its name, King's Lynn. Earlier, when the land belonged to the church, it was known as Bishop's Lynn. But it's a royal estate that's more associated with this part of Norfolk today. Sandringham, acquired by the then Prince of Wales in 1861, and now, of course, the private country residence of the Queen. In the surrounding villages, there's much evidence of those royal connections. The butcher, the baker, the builder, and the newsagent, all holders of the royal warrants, by appointment, suppliers of the necessities of life to the Queen and her family. King's Lynn is usually shortened by local people today to simply Lynn, and Lynn Sport is the name given to a sports and recreation centre where we've set up our cameras today. So let's now join the people of this part of Norfolk with our experts.
Well, a very bright and shiny pair of pottery sheep. I think have you had these a long time?
I think it's had them about 2 years, that's all. The son bought them in a whole lot of stuff, of bits and pieces.
And these were amongst that box
Yes,
there?
and they were auctioned for £15, and he bought them for £15. He didn't know what was in there, no idea really what was in there.
Right. It's a very common story for these because a great many pairs of sheep turn up in little auctions. And the sad thing is that most of them are modern reproductions. These are probably the most copied of all sorts of pottery pieces one sees.
Yeah.
So what we have to look at here is, well, immediately when you see them as bright and gaudy as these, one's normally very suspicious. And have to look at the reasons as to why they would be right or why they would be wrong. The models like these were made in Staffordshire originally in around 1830. They don't normally have marks. Sometimes they have on the back a moulded mark of Walton or Ralph Salt, some of the potters' names on them. And these have no mark, and that's a good sign because the copies normally are clearly marked with a spurious name. But the handmade objects, one looks at the way they're conformed, the tree on the back of these is probably the best clue. The individual leaves are impressed in moulds and joined on back to back. You've got the leaves on the back and on the front applied separately. And that's quite a good sign also, because some of the copied ones are only cast in one piece and not so individually applied as those. But one mainly needs to look at the glaze on these, and here the appearance of the glaze is rather a strange strong blue colour, almost too blue. The blue is induced in the glaze to make them look a bit more like Chinese porcelain, in fact. That's why blue was added to the glaze. But here, the glaze has got little tiny cracks. It naturally forms as glaze cools and over the years. And that is something which is there, and it's hard to fake, and the copiers induce it. And here you can see the crazing in there, but not very well. And that is the best thing of all. So these are writer's reign, 1830s. But the remarkable thing is that having knocked around in that box, they're in very good condition. A handsome pair, and therefore a jolly good find. Because he's got a pair worth, I suppose we're looking at about £450.
Oh, yeah, as much as that. Very good too. I shan't tell him.
Both these delightful children's books were published by Dean & Son of Fleet Street. As you see, they're both Dean & Son. And they had, from the 1840s, the monopoly on movable, flap and illusion books. For a period of about 40 years in England, they were able to produce these amazing books. This one, it says summer on this page here, but we're actually in winter on this side, and we have to move them down gently like this. They all need unfolding. There we are. And we have summer. Now, I assume these all came from your family, did they?
They do. My father's family have all worked in printing, right back to my great-grandfather, and he acquired them originally where he was working.
Well, he was
printers.
actually working for Dean's.
Yes.
Well, they are enormous fun. The thing that amazes me about them, this one in particular, normally a movable book like this, when you're turning down the pages, children rarely have the ability to do it, or to do it calmly. The rarest thing about children's books is condition. This is in lovely condition and absolutely stunning. But I'm even more excited by the other book that you brought in here, which is the Dean & Co. Royal Movable Punch and Judy book. This, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely splendid. Hardly keep my hands off it. There is somewhere here, but you would expect this. This is a true movable book. Look at this one. This is wonderful. Mrs. Punch giving a karate chop. It's just too good, isn't it? Forget about the history of these things. Just the sheer theatre of them, I think, makes them absolutely wonderful. Try again. Playing with the beetle here. They're going for a lot of karate chops. Absolutely wonderful. So, have you any idea of their value?
I've no idea at all.
Well, because Dean is very highly collectible, there were many other people on the continent late in the 19th century doing these, but Deans were really the pioneers of these, and so as such they are very highly collectible. Now, having talked about the condition, I think they're both in fairly good condition. This Punch and Judy one, I would value it between 150 and 200 pounds. And this transformation book here, which very charming, although not as rare, I would put it about 75 to 100.
Very
I would love to see what else your father has in his attic. I wish we'd brought in more. It would have been great fun.
But it was given to me when I was living at Castle Rising by a lady who had been a lady in waiting to the royal family, and she said that it had been on Queen Alexandra's dressing table.
Well, I can well believe that, actually. It's very exciting to find something of royal provenance when we're just a stone's throw away from Sandringham. And this is a particularly lovely silver-mounted ladies' sweetmeat box. It's made in France, and it's made of rock crystal, which is a fascinating material. It's very understated. It looks exactly like glass, but in fact it's very far from glass. First of all, it's very cold to the touch. It's dramatically harder than glass, and it's a natural stone. And what we see in front of us is lapidary work. It's not cast, it's hard stone, literally, engraved with stars. And the bezel and hinge are made of silver gilt. And it's made by a firm called Keller, who are working in Paris. It's absolutely typical of Queen Alexandra's taste. She was a great Fabergé collector. And in a sense, this has got rather a lot to do with Fabergé's work, at least in style. And I think it's a very dramatic discovery. Have you any idea of its value at all?
No, not at all, no.
I wonder if it becomes a surprise to you to know that it might be worth £600.
Would indeed, yes.
I'll tell you what I find particularly fascinating, the naked lady that's here. Not because she's a naked lady, but her hair. You see the way it's flowing down in a very Art Nouveau manner. Yeah. But in fact, if we look at the date there, made in London 1876, that's a nice early date. It's pointing towards Art Nouveau. In the 1876 period, the idea of ivy leaves, which we've got here, they're very typical, they're typical decoration of that period. The maker, we've got the maker's mark, you see just tucked in there. That's actually Hancock's, and very important firm, of course. Lovely bit of cutting on the glass as well. Some of the other aspects of design one would expect perhaps a little bit earlier, but of course it's typical of the 19th century when they're mixing up the different aspects of design. It's a lovely character, unusual, say, particularly the way the handle has been produced. I could see that quite easily selling for £2,500 to £3,000.
Well, that surprised me, actually. I didn't think it was going to be as much as that.
That's actually not a teapot. It's a punch pot.
Is it?
It's a punch pot. I love that restoration. You didn't do that. That was done a long time ago. It's a fantastic example of Staffordshire red stoneware, and they're actually imitating what the Chinese were doing in the late 17th, early 18th century. But this piece dates to somewhere around 1740, 1760, that very broad period. I love these vine sprigs, and that's really a clue, if you didn't already know it, to the fact that the contents of this were alcoholic, not tea. Actually, they've made a really good solid handle, because once you fill that up with your jolly old punch, it's going to be a pretty massively heavy object. I would say that's still got a bit of value. It's probably still worth somewhere in the region of £300 to £500.
Is it?
Yeah, it's a very, very nice object.
What day, 17?
Mid-18th century. Yeah.
What would it have been worth if it had been original?
If it had been complete, then it would have been worth about twice that amount. Yeah.
Well, it was left to me by an elderly lady, and we just hung it up and paid no more attention to it, actually.
This is quite the best darning sampler I've ever seen, and that includes ones in museums like the V&A. The stitchery is unbelievable, and it seems to be completely unfaded, which is unusual. And then there's all this open work, the drawn thread work. And what is nice is that it's actually dated. It's a sort of knitting stitch there.
That's what made me think possibly that 1769 wasn't perhaps genuine.
Oh no,
and they looked
I mean
these
are nearly always 18th century.
Really?
And it's just the right sort of date to it. I mean, you find the same sort of motifs as this on a printed fabric of the period and so on.
Right,
I mean, it's absolutely, everything's right about it. It's certainly worth £500 or £600,
Really?
and somebody might well ask more for it. So I congratulate you.
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
Really
Speechless.
lovely.
Repeat after me. Fuku.
Fuku.
Ruku.
Rudku.
Ju.
Ju.
Fukurokuju.
Fukuruchu.
Nearly, that's right. That's who he is. Fukurokuju is one of the Japanese gods of good fortune, and in keeping with his good fortune, he's actually covered in a number of medallions which actually mean good luck and health and generally good wishes. I've never seen a piece of Japanese cargo ware quite this big. It's enormous. The other thing that's unusual is that his staff of long life and longevity whips off, the top comes off, and looking down inside, we've definitely got a hollow arm that communicates right into the base of this piece. So in theory, you could drink something out of here. I don't know whether I want to drink anything out of here now. You haven't used it as a teapot.
No.
Do you like sake?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh, well, maybe this is what you should do. You should fill it with sake and have a wild party, and then suddenly you say, can I offer you some more, you know? Worth £600 to £900, something like that.
Yeah. Marvellous.
This is obviously a Georgian cupboard. I mean, the quality of this mahogany here, this flame figuring, is beautiful, isn't it?
Yes, it
Lovely
is.
quality.
Yes.
So here we have a good Georgian cupboard.
Yes.
That, as you know well, originally belonged to the bureau over here.
Well, my mother had this part done. She wanted to have it raised a little and had it put on the feet, you see.
Right.
So that's how it happened.
The first thing is, thank heavens they're both in the same family or
Yes.
even the same house. That's the best thing.
Yeah.
But I think the worst thing in the world would be, with the interest in antique furniture today and the values today, to allow this divorce to go on much longer.
Yes,
I think
see.
they should be married again,
Yes,
if
I do.
possible.
Yes,
And I don't think it would be difficult to do. The feet would come off, I think, quite easily.
Yes.
You know, they're roughly in that Georgian style. So this top's been added, and so there's been an alteration to the top of this
Yes.
as well.
You see, this actually is what my mother had. She had them split up.
Right. And one of the ways of telling is to look at the backboards
Yes.
to see if they're made in the same way or from the same piece of wood.
Yes.
This, looking at the back, are perfectly original backboards. This
It
one
is.
has been restored and reinforced. That could all stay as it was.
Yeah.
And now, what's the inside like? It's, again, a lovely colour. It's been very well looked after and well
Out
polished.
of the sun, yes.
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 And a very, very nice interior. Endless little drawers. The Georgians
Yes,
had a
well-
wonderful time with all these tiny drawers.
Yes. Obviously, you know about what's inside there, don't
Oh,
you?
is there a secret drawer?
Yes.
Let's have a look. Where? Oh, in there. Oh, lovely. Now, I wonder what he put in there.
Well, I won't tell you what I put in there occasionally.
It's not very secret anymore.
No, it's not. Of course not.
It's got a nice wear and tear. It's obviously been well used and well loved. Now, it's interesting with this because you've got here a bureau worth, shall we say, on its own, this bureau with the alterations, if it just turned up on its own at auction,
Yes.
it would make probably barely even £2,000.
Really?
£1,500 to £2,000.
I see.
The cupboard over there, well, it's very nice, needs a lot of work doing on it. The feet are obviously wrong. That came up by itself, probably barely £500.
Really? Gosh.
So as separated pieces,
Yes.
sort of £2,000 to £2,500, up to £3,000
Yes.
at the most. Have you ever had it valued as an entire piece?
No. No.
Not at all. Well, I think that it would be certainly double the figure I've just given you. So for an insurance figure,
Yes.
back together,
Yes.
even forgetting the fact they've got to spend the money on the work, but as they are together, £5,000 for insurance.
Yes. Yes. Insurance. Yes.
Well, my great-uncle, Jack Drew, was a second-hand dealer in Norfolk in the 30s, 40s and 50s with a pony and cart. And when he died, he had sheds and even an old double-decker bus full of stuff. And this was one of the things we rescued from the horse's stable.
Well, you're very, very lucky. You'll have a surprise, perhaps. It's by a very well-known designer and ceramist, a man called William de Morgan, who was a friend and associate of William Morris and was a great expert at tiles. He's particularly known for reviving the art of lustre decoration, which was completely lost. But this is in what he calls his Persian colours. Quite a number of his tiles are on blank tiles made by other manufacturers, but these are very thick, and I think these are the tiles that he made himself. Some of them are made of pressed clay, and I think these might be quite early because of that. And I expect you'd be rather surprised at the value of it.
No idea whatsoever.
Well, these days, one of these complete tile panels, and the thing that's good about it is that you've got the whole picture here. Sometimes one is missing, but it's obviously complete, the design, would fetch £2,000 to £3,000 at auction. So you did very well to rescue it from a cart.
Yes. Since the 17th century, giving a gold box has been a way of transferring a large sum of money to somebody without embarrassing them. And it's a particularly appropriate gift for a monarch to make to somebody who's of lower status than they are. And this is a particularly interesting example because within it's engraved from the Queen Dowager to a Mr. Bruyère. Have you any idea who Monsieur Bruyère is?
Well, I think he is the great-grandfather of my great-aunt.
Yes,
but I don't actually know anything more about him.
He must have helped. It's Queen Adelaide. In actual fact, she's referred to as the Queen Dowager because Queen Victoria was already reigning by that time. And there's no doubt at all that your ancestor must have been a great help to the Queen on some level or another. Might have been a lawyer, might even have been a cook. But anyway, she's, oddly enough, chosen a French gold box, which was made, we call it an Empire box, because it's obviously made after the French Revolution. And it's made in 18-karat gold, and that's why it can take this extraordinary finish. You can see quite clearly that the background of the decoration is what we call granulated, and it has a sort of mossy texture to it. But the other ornament is raised up, and it's chased. It's made by using a burin, a steel chisel to work the gold, and it's very malleable, and the purer the metal, the more malleable it is. It's a very fine example, and in fact it's in absolutely mint condition, and has probably come down to us in exactly the same state as Queen Adelaide gave it. Have you any idea what it might be worth?
No idea at all.
It's actually worth about £5,000.
That's a pleasant surprise.
Very good indeed.
There aren't many occasions, you know, on the Antiques Roadshow when we can show you something and say, this is absolutely priceless. But that is certainly true of the object in this box. Is it not, Ian? It's priceless beyond value.
Absolutely. Because, of course, what we've got here is King John's cup.
Dating from?
It dates from about 1340. And is the earliest known English secular or domestic standing cup that we have.
It's absolutely breathtaking, isn't it? I mean, it's enamel and silver gilt, and the fine enameling here around the base. I mean, I've just never seen anything like it.
And they give this wonderful jewel-like quality
yes.
to the piece. And of course, they represent the sporting life of the 14th century. The various characters that we can see enamelled round here with hawks, with dogs, and the lovely scenes around the base with the hounds chasing the hares in practically every scene. And then this lovely touch, that just in one of them, the hound is actually chasing a fox. Just that little bit of difference.
And why a cup with a cover?
The idea of a cover goes back actually to a much earlier period. If you look in Bede, Bede makes this lovely reference to life being like a bird flying in through one door of a house and out of the other. So, of course, when you were banqueting, you shared your banqueting area with various birds in the rafters, so lids were useful.
And I gather that the cup incorporates those three things: wine, obviously, women and song.
Indeed. This chap just blowing a horn. So we've got sport, we've got music, wine, we've got music, and when you've finished drinking the wine, then, right in the bottom, a fair maiden. So wine, women and song, absolutely.
So it really is, as I say, priceless, unique. There simply isn't another like it in the world.
No, it is one of the great international art treasures.
Well, tell me, what do you use these for?
Ashtrays.
Ashtrays? Well, that's one thing you can certainly do. That's not their original intention.
No.
Did you know that?
I think they're pickle dishes, aren't they?
They are
pickle
indeed,
dishes
pickle dishes. Now, how did they get into your ashtray collection?
Well, they were my husband's aunts. When she died, we had them.
They are called pickle leaf dishes, and I'm going to look very closely to see whether the glaze has been damaged. Usually, glaze is a very hard glass-like substance, but English porcelain has a glaze which is much softer, and where I should imagine a few embers of ashes would not really do them many favours. This is sort of East Ender porcelain, by which I mean this is porcelain made by one of the very, very early English porcelain factories at Bow. Bow produced huge quantities of blue and white porcelain from an early period, from the 1750s onwards, and so much blue and white that they were beginning to compete with incoming Chinese blue and white porcelain. So one of the names they gave themselves was the New Canton China Works, which is rather a nice name. The design we see here is a very traditional Bow design of a cluster of grapes set against the veins and smaller leaves of the overall vine leaf shaped dish. And here we have a nice little detail. If we turn over, we'll see that the intention in the design was to have a little stalk coming off as a leaf would have. And on the second piece here, the intention was the same. And you can just see the residue of what was there as a stalk, but it fell off. It fell off at the biscuit firing. But they still carried on, because even though it was imperfect, porcelain was a very rare material, and they decided they couldn't afford to waste anything. Well, are you going to carry on using them as ashtrays?
No, we don't smoke. It's just when people come round.
Oh, I see. Other people use them as ashtrays. Incredibly, they are in good condition. I'm going to say that they're worth somewhere in the region of £300, £400 each.
Really?
This lovely girl, although not a garden gnome, is in fact important because she's the Victorian ancestor of many of the garden gnomes we loathe or love today. Now tell me where you came by her.
I bought it locally off my wife's auntie.
Yes.
And she bought it from a local market in the Wisbech area.
Right.
And originally there was two of these, a boy and a girl. And she went to the auction and bid for what she thought was the girl, but actually bought two of them for £1.
Ah, for £1? When was that?
Well, it was many years ago. I couldn't tell you. I've had it 25 years.
Right.
But
it's very rare to see a garden figure intact of this period. This is made of a material called terracotta. Terracotta was the great building material of the late Victorian period. Now, the most familiar building in terracotta that one can think of is the Natural History Museum in London. That's very decorative facade, designed by Waterhouse. It's all made of terracotta, animals, sculpture, and so on. And this is a direct relative of that. The terracotta boom of the Victorian period affected architecture, it affected chimney pots, everything you care to think of. And of course, it also affected garden ornaments. And of course, terracotta was perfect because it was weatherproof. The great thing about this also is that on the front here is the maker's mark, J. Blashfield of Paddington. Now, Blashfield, a major maker of terracotta in London, a pioneer, was in fact the maker of the terracotta for the Natural History Museum. So he had a major business, and while his predominant work was architectural, obviously they made their money producing figures like this for a mass market. It's a good piece of sculpture, mass-produced, of course, from moulds in the factory, but Blashfield is one of the great names, and to see a piece here is an unexpected treat. Now, £1 was a good price. I think it was a fair price. It wasn't Fakenham Market, was it? Because that's still a very good market, isn't it, round here? I think you did well. I'd certainly have paid quite a bit more than £1 even 20 years ago, and I think I'd very happily bid up to £300, £350 for her. So your £1 was well invested.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, do you know what these were used for?
I haven't a clue, but several people think they were for candles.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The actual purpose of these is as saucers. They would have had little cups that went into the holes, and they're a type of saucer we know as a trembleuse saucer. The idea is that the deep hole holds the cup very tightly, and the people with the trembles, with the shakes, they would hold them securely, and the cup wouldn't spill, and they wouldn't lose the drink all over the table. So that's the purpose of
that is what they were.
And they are Italian. They're made in region north of Naples at a place called Castelli, where very bright, colourful decoration was done. But these would be 1690, 1700 in date, something like that. They don't look it because the glaze is extremely hard. It doesn't wear, it doesn't rub, it hardly chips around the rim, and these are in remarkable condition. It looks so clean and bright, doesn't it? But and that's why so often people have brought these to roadshows not realising they're anything at all.
No.
But we're able to look at the colours, look at the way they're painted in a great free style. The family potters who made these, the Gruet family, specialised in these very atmospheric landscapes, and they're painted in very delicate tones, especially the effects of the trees, and some lovely distance can be achieved. These little, very cartoon-like simple figures and very stylised buildings are distinctive. So, for their age, lovely condition, they suffer a little being incomplete, being just the saucers.
Without the cups,
But even so, a jolly nice condition piece like that is going to be worth about £600 each.
Jolly good.
Well, these are a delightful pair of paintings. As you can see, they're by Edmund Bristow. One of them is very nicely signed here for us, who was a 19th century English artist, painted in the sort of first half of the 19th century. But they're also very amusing because of the subject. They are really an allegory of the folly of human arrogance. They're actually a sequel painting, one following on after the other. Here you see the beginning of the duel, the dandy standing with his fat cigar and his top hat, taking on the commoner, who looks rather worried, I would say, for the duel. And there's obviously the dandy's seconder. And here we have after the duel, where the dandy's hat has fallen off. He's been, I would say, mortally wounded, wouldn't you? Yes. And there the commoner creeps off, rather concerned about what he's done. And I think this type of painting was originally developed in Germany around about the 18th century, and it was a sort of way of sending up human pomposity and using animals in paintings rather than using human beings.
Yes.
How did you come to have the paintings?
Well, they were left to us by a family friend.
They're in very nice condition. Lovely to have a pair. One is signed, the other one doesn't appear to be, but that's of no consequence. I think because they're a pair and because they're so amusing, I would say they're worth between 4,000 to 5,000 for the pair, which I hope is a nice prize.
That's lovely. That actually works.
Do you know where that name comes from, Teddy Bear? It comes from Teddy Roosevelt, who was a president of the United States, and he went on a hunting expedition and didn't manage to shoot any bears, and so one of the organisers captured a bear and tied it to a tree and said, "There you are, there's one for you to shoot." And he said, "No, I refuse to shoot that bear. I won't do it." And that bear became known as Teddy's bear. And that's why all bears then became known as teddy bears. After all these years, he deserves to have a nice retirement and I hope you put him on your shelf with all your other bears.
I haven't got just bears, I've got all sorts of cuddly toys.
Have you?
Yeah.
Well, you look after this one well.
They all go in the one cell.
That's
all
good.
together, and they're all squashed up.
Marvellous.
Well, my background to it was I was nearly disposing of it about 3 months ago until I saw one of your previous programmes showing a William Moorcroft vase, especially the value of that vase, which made me think, and I think, well, surely we've put something into a box to go into a car boot sale like that.
Yes. Yeah. Why don't I never find these at car boot sales? I tell you. But that being said, it's all there. It's a lovely piece of Moorcroft. A nice, a pleasing shape to my mind. The signature, by the way, W. Moorcroft, was actually written by Moorcroft himself.
It was?
So all the signatures, all the monograms on Moorcroft pottery have either been applied by William Moorcroft or in later years his son Walter. The pattern is actually called Claremont.
Right.
Don't ask me why he called it Claremont, I haven't got a clue. But the technique is known as lining or tube lining.
Yes.
You can actually see the way that it's being applied. It's almost like piping on icing on a cake, and then the glazes are applied afterwards. Value. Dear. How much do you reckon you would have put on that in a car boot sale?
Probably about £5.
Yeah. I'd be delighted to pay $500 for it. Quite. Really? And the chances are that it may well be up to $800 or slightly more. So I think there's a moral in this, isn't there? I mean, before you put anything in a car boot sale, tune in to the Antiques Roadshow.
That's very true.
It's Japanese.
Yeah,
that seems to me rather good quality.
Yes.
19th century.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I couldn't go very much further. I hadn't remembered seeing a sort of tortoise piece before.
Actually, let's start on these because these are the best bits of the whole vase. This is a superb bit of bronze casting. We've got a third little are they terrapins?
Well, they've got tails.
Yeah, so that means they're terrapins?
I don't know.
I don't know
anything very much about it.
We haven't got a terrapin expert here today.
No.
You've been out with a polisher, haven't you?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, good. Actually, I say good. You haven't done any damage because usually if you polish something like this, you destroy it. But this is the correct colour. This is the correct colour.
I mean, the word patination is applied to bronze furniture, and this is what people casually polish off. It's taken 100 years to get to that, and in sort of half an hour's work you can remove it completely. It becomes shiny, dull, uninteresting, because the interest is in the colour that is built up.
It's a really nice thing. And I'm going to suggest that it's worth somewhere in the region of maybe £400 to £600, somewhere in that region.
It's great.
That's super.
Well, we see a lot of Royal Worcester on this programme, and I always enjoy seeing it, but I don't really recall seeing such a sumptuously beautiful Royal Worcester piece in all the time I've been doing the roadshow. It's very, very beautiful. It's a super vase. How did you come by it?
My mother-in-law, she died about 5 years ago when she left the vase to me.
It's made in 1883. What is particularly lovely, on this beautiful glazed Parian body, which is what the body is, looking like ivory, really, the painter, or the gilder, rather, because that's mainly the work of the gilder, has put this fantastically sumptuous bit of raised enamel and gold work on the piece. This work takes an enormity of time. It's not that like painting Highland cattle or birds or flowers on it, which is a fairly quick process done over 2 or 3 firings, but this involves the building up by very, very slow patient work over weeks and weeks of time, this elaborate raised work. It really is fantastic. The quality of the work is absolutely marvellous. There are people about that can do work like this now, but the work would take such a long time now. The costs of making such a piece would, I suppose, be something like about £7,000 or £8,000 to produce an item of this quality by hand nowadays, because of the enormity of time. It's not perhaps everybody's cup of tea nowadays, but to me, I think it's superb. I suppose if it went into auction, one would expect it to fetch something like about £1,250, but I should think probably from the insurance point of view, you ought to be thinking nearer in terms of a couple of thousand.
It's a Miculae Flintlock
Kurdish rifle. The workmanship on it is truly magnificent. The stock is made of walnut. The insets all over are ivory. And where you see it is green, then it's stained ivory. So it's ivory throughout. You have all this brass pickwork all over it. And then, of course, the thing that really sets it off is all the gold along these facets along the top. And it's magnificent Damascus steel barrel. It's an eye stopper. The date would be about 1800, as near as I can say, but being a traditional weapon, they were used before and after this particular date. The rifle itself is very heavily grooved, as you'll see, right the way through there. Very, very heavily grooved. It must have been quite an effort to load, because when you get a rifle barrel and then you've got to drive a ball all the way down, it's very difficult.
I've seen one actually inlaid in silver on the top.
That's right.
Not gold.
Yes, you can. You can get them with silver bands. But then this is such a superior weapon that it was obviously owned by a man of some consequence. Now, have you any idea of the value?
No.
No?
No.
I'm sure you would like to know what I think.
Yes, so you would.
Well, I feel that if you sold it by auction, it is such an eye stopper that it's got to fetch something in excess of £3,000.
Oh.
So there you are.
Yeah.
I bought it in an auction.
Auction?
Yes.
Recently?
About 10 years ago, I think. But when I thought it was pretty, I got it for about £14.
It's instantly recognisable as the work of that great Art Deco French glassmaker, René Lalique. And the character on the top is actually none other than Cupid. And I can tell you that he designed this particular box and cover in 1919. And it goes by the title of Amour à Six, which is a lovely title. It's in frosted glass, and what's more, he's actually heightened the moulding with this blue stain. Now, you've got to be very careful today because there's a lot of Lalique glass out there that's been re-stained. And the simple test is if you can wipe it off, then it's probably right. It's the modern staining that is virtually impossible to get off. Very subtly made, and as I said, it's quite desirable. I mean, £40, God. I mean, I would be very happy to find one of these for 400. I'd be very happy actually to find one, I think, for 800.
Really?
In fact, when I think about it, I think I'd be very happy to find one for 1,000. So, I don't know, I have dreams about attending these auctions, and you obviously attended the auction of my dreams, should I say. And thank you so much for bringing the end result into us today.
Right. That's really good.
Yeah, it is, isn't it, really? It's only money there.
I'm quite impressed with that.
Well, my father bought this one in Guildford in 1969 in a shop for £2.50.
Not bad.
And just because he liked it, in fact, and realised that it was a quality picture.
It's a wonderful example by George Wetherall. Rather typical of his works. I mean, he was, like so many of his generation, a great fan of Turner. But this takes Turner into the height of Victorian watercolour painting. And here he is in the midst of a hotbed of artists in Whitby and Robin Hood Bay up the road, with this marvellous school of artists. He was actually not an official artist till he reached 50 years old. He moved to Whitby in 1830, age 20, and worked for a bank till he was 50, but painted away as an amateur painter. I mean, not what we would call an amateur painter, because he's highly professional. And always in this rather minute style, with this wonderful light. I mean, we can see the influence of Turner painting right into the sun. We can see Whitby Bay here, the magnificence of the bay. You really couldn't have a better example than this. It's superb. As for your £2.50,
I think today this picture is worth in the region of £4,000 or £5,000.
Gosh.
I mean, it's a really cracking example, which moves us on to somewhere else, from High Victorian to, again, a wonderful example by an artist I don't know terribly well, in fact, Juasut. In fact, with a strange name, which I imagine comes from the north of Europe, from perhaps Belgium or something.
Yes.
But he was a man who worked in England in the 1890s, 1900. Very different from the Weatherall, much softer, much more Northern European, not painting in the height of summer, painting in winter in these rather gentle colours, in that almost Dutch way. But again, a very beautiful example of a soft, highly formed technique of gentle coloration, of a feeling for detail, a feeling for the atmosphere.
That's right. I love the dead weeds here. I mean, it's wonderful.
No, I couldn't agree more.
Yes.
But if that one was £2.50, how much was this?
I bought that in an auction in Whitehaven for 2 shillings in 1969.
So you were rather in competition, and you were winning on the price stakes.
Yes, on the price stakes, yes.
Well,
my cheapest.
But Juasut is not as expensive as Weatherall. He's not as sought after, he's not as prolific. But this is a cracking example, and your 2 bob today would be £1,000, £1,500.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well, finally today to the mystery of the goose on the King's Lynn silver. This ewer and dish are part of a collection of silver that was commissioned by the town of King's Lynn from a London goldsmith in 1683. But for 300 years or so, the true identity of the maker has remained a mystery because the Assay Office records of that time were destroyed in a fire. The only clue as to the maker's identity is down here, the maker's mark comprising a goose inside a dotted circle. And ever since, it's been known as the goose silver. It's only recently, and as a result of the most meticulous research, that the true identity of the maker has become known. His name was John Duck. So this is no goose, it's a duck. Or Mr. Duck had a great sense of humour. Whichever way you look at it, magnificent pieces of silver, and that together with the King John Cup that we saw earlier has given us some remarkable things to see today. Well, next week, I particularly hope you'll join us for the last programme in the current series, and we're going to County Durham. So until then, from all of us here, goodbye.